there were soldiers laying on the incline with their feet blown off. They were all in a minefield. And the tape, we used to call tracing tape, all around them to protect anyone else from going into that minefield. And those were the bravest soldiers because they kept directing us away from the minefield. The bravest soldiers that I can imagine I've ever seen in my life. There with their feet blown off, telling us not to come into the minefield.
Welcome to Triumphant Spirit, America's World War II Generation Speaks. This program is a series of broadcasts featuring the stories of a generation that fought and won the Second World War. No matter how they fought the war or where, on the home front or the battlefield, each veteran featured on the program contributed valiantly to a victory that changed the 20th century. Here are their stories in their own words. They are stories of actions and deeds that not only helped shape the outcome of the war, but the very world we live in today. America's entry into the war against Nazi Germany began with Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, on November 8, 1942. Inexperienced and untested American soldiers were introduced for the first time to combat during the course of the North African campaign against a skilled German-Italian war machine. However, 6 months later, after bitter, hard fighting in the rugged mountainous regions of Algeria and Tunisia, it was the American soldier in concert with his British and French comrades who stood victorious. One veteran who fought in North Africa is former U.S. Army Technical Sergeant Samuel A. Bakal, who served with the 1st Combat Engineer Battalion as a demolition specialist. He then went on to participate in the Sicilian, Normandy, northern France, Ardennes, Rhineland, and the Central European campaigns. He was awarded the Silver Star, the nation's 3rd highest decoration for valor in combat, and also a Bronze Star. Sam also received a Purple Heart for wounds suffered in battle.
I think in those days it was a 13-week basic training course, but I already was told that I was going to be in the 1st Division because the cadre from the 1st Division, they already had left for, 1st Division left for Scotland. And the cadre remained here in Fort Meade, Maryland. And I was sent to Fort Meade and spent 11 to 13 weeks in basic training, and then went immediately to Africa from there. I did spend no other time in service here. I joined the outfit right there, which was coming right into the Kasserine Pass. They already had made the invasion, the 1st Division in Oran. And I hooked up with the outfit right at the end of the Kasserine Pass. They were coming out of it, and I was joining them as we were retreating. And we all got together in this desert oasis called El Ghata in North Africa. Of course, I was in the Corps of Engineers, which is the 1st Engineer Combat Battalion attached to the 1st Division. And we did some more maneuvering, and that's when I got into the, my enterprise, which is mines. And that's when I ran into the first German mines, which were the S mines and Teller mines. Now, the S mines were the booby trap mines, the bouncing Betty, as we called them. And they were dropped from airplanes, some of them, and they were landing all around us, and we had to defuse them. But that was the early part of the war, which was not in our advantage, but we learned a lot from that defeat from Kasserine. And as we started to move out of the El Guitar area, that's when we started the real Tunisian campaign. And the problems there were, what we did mostly was mine laying and pulling of mines. The pulling of mines became a very difficult thing because the Teller mines, which are anti-tank mines, had handles on them. And your tendency would be just to pull them out and you didn't have to even defuse them, just pull them out. But the Germans were clever enough that there was 3 wells under the Teller mine where any personnel mine could be attached to. And many of our, comrade soldiers who were not familiar, and naturally none of us were until we found out that the way they performed their task, we never pulled mines that way again. And we took caution, and we would dig or probe till we found the mines, and we would attach a long tether to the handle and go back about 20 yards or so behind some, obstructed view and pull them that way. Most of them were not booby-trapped, but the ones that were devastating to whoever had to handle them. But that was basically what we did in the early part of the African campaign. Plus, on many occasions, we would go behind our own lines and spend an entire evening or nightfall laying our own minefields. And that was the most incredible thing in the world, to be out there on your own, just gathering mines and placing them. We had a system that was the 2 steps to front ways and 1 step to the right, 2 steps, and that's how the pattern of our mines were. And we didn't dig them in like the Germans did. We just laid them out there because all we did want to have them know that there was a minefield, and that would slow down their tank counterattack.
Sam, Kasserine Pass was a defeat for the American Army. Do you recall how the men who participated in that battle felt after the battle itself?
Well, yes, we came back from that, we quite disillusioned. Americans by nature never feel like they can lose. And when we were retreating, it was the most god-awfulest feeling, But we were looking to get back to safety. And from that point on, we did go back into some basic training techniques. And the experience of being actually defeated possibly worked to our advantage at that point in time. Because as we dug in the El Guitar area and rested, most of the officers and the staff and formulated new ways of how we're going to continue on this war. And of course the experience is what was wonderful to have been under combat and even gotten out of it, with your life. But you learn from every difficult experience. Kasserine was an awful shock, probably more so to the, officer staff, than to just the regular GI who retreated without knowledge of why he was retreating, just knowing that they were coming after us, and we were getting defeated by the Africa Corps, which was noted in those days for their great technique in war. But again, that turned out to be, except for the Battle of the Bulge, the last time we ever retreated. And
Sam, you won a Bronze Star in North Africa. How did you receive that Bronze Star?
Well, I think the Bronze Star was given to me, I remember, through, as I was explaining, all the mines that I laid in that part of the world. There were many a night I'd be back and forth, shuffling, placing, not stopping for a minute. I don't know where you get all the strength and the courage and all the other things that to be behind your own lines in no man's land, placing mines, and not a sound, because they had air superiority in those days. And I guess I was observed doing what I was supposed to do, not more. But that was the Bronze Star efforts. I think it was written that call for meritorious service.
After the defeat of the Africa Corps in North Africa, what happened to your unit next?
Well, we were in Africa for a short period of time, and we went into some other training techniques because we were destined to go to Sicily. But a very tragic thing happened, not to me, but in our training techniques. We were getting familiar with Bangalore torpedoes, which was those long pipe-like explosives, and on some training exercise, buddy that I was with, who I bunked with in those days, he was carrying a Bangalore torpedo, and unfortunately some accident happened, and it blew off both his hands at that time, and that was actually one of the first times I witnessed our own men under our own conditions getting such a devastating injury. And of course I lost sight of him after I visited him in the hospital at that time, and it's hard when you see that, but we had to keep going, and we did, and we got on board to go to Sicily. Sicily, I was aboard an LCI. That was a World War II vessel. And coming from Africa to Sicily, the Mediterranean, which I think Mediterranean says itself to be calm, it was the roughest day that, I don't know, I can't say prior or after, but the waves were so incredibly high that the LCI would be lifted off its mooring and would come bouncing back down, and I mean, almost every soldier aboard that was seasick or hanging on for their dear life. That's how treacherous the Mediterranean was at that time, for that period of time. And we landed in Gela, G-E-L-A, with no incident, actually. We got ashore, and we went inland. For the first 2 days, we kept going inland. On the third day, we dug in some area on a bluff, and that was when the paratroopers, or the evening before, the paratroopers come down and overshot their mark, and again there was friendly fire, and there was a tragedy that night, that evening. when we were firing at our own paratroopers. We got word soon after to cease firing because we didn't know who it was at that time, and it was a very tough evening. The following morning, we woke up from our dug-in positions, and they're looking right down. We could see the German tanks coming from a counterattack. And that was an incredible sight. We had no way of stopping them. We didn't have anything. We had immediately, we sent word to battalion that these tanks were coming. They got in touch with the Navy, and the most remarkable sight that any human or soldier would ever witness, they zeroed in on the tanks from out in the water and took them out. And that was what saved the day in Sicily. Those tanks, there was at least a half a dozen coming up, ready to attack, and they were taken out one by one by the Navy.
Sam, the Sicily invasion took place in July. By the end of August, the island was taken from the Italian and the German army. What happened after Sicily?
From Sicily, well, you know, I have to go back just a bit in Sicily. It was, the combat itself was not fierce in some ways. It was a matter of just pushing ahead. We had problems in a town of Catania, which was in the central part of Sicily. But we fought there for about 30 or 33 days, day and night. We just kept going on. There was no rest. There was no anything. You had to eat from your own sea rations or cave rations. The food couldn't be brought up. We just kept going. That was the toughest part of the Sicilian campaign. They were retreating and we were pursuing, and that's how that thing. After that Sicilian campaign, we came back to a rest area in Sicily for about a month or so, until they, I guess, they reorganized where we were heading to from there. From that point, we loaded on a boat. It was the Empress of Australia. I can't remember. It was a luxury liner during those time, but it was run down as all heck. And we went, from Sicily, we went back to Africa. And in Africa, then they reorganized. We got issued more clothing and everything. We went to England.
When you arrived in England, Sam, what did you do?
We were billeted in the south of England, in a town called Corfe Castle. I don't know if anybody's familiar with England. The southern was near Bournemouth, Weymouth, Swanage. Those were the cities. Bournemouth was the largest city. Weymouth and Swanage and Portsmouth were close by. And for about a month or two, we just took care of ourselves. And then we went into some training schedules. We were up north of England, where we'd leave for about a week or so. And we built ramps that were simulated landing craft. And we would push off of that and get into the water in a freezing, cold, bitter time of the year in England, and did our training, which we suspected to be invasion training. Being that we were already well-seasoned veterans, we had the knowledge that that was the next step. And as we always said, the 1st Division was always first in everything, so we had no doubt that we'd be going on early on to England. I mean, from England to Europe.
Sam, do you recall how you got from ship to shore?
Well, yes. It was very early afternoon, first wave already had landed, and we were coming in about 2 to 3 hours after the first wave. And every time we get closer, when we got directed to go to the shore, the shells were coming in, and this Navy lieutenant kept turning around. He didn't want, of course, we weren't going to make it. Well, about the third turn around, we said, listen, we have to get ashore. I mean, we cannot keep turning around. He told us. So on about the fourth turnaround, we went toward the shore. And luckily, we got to the shore. So we got out in water up to here, and here was I packed with that damn radio on my back and a 45 on my side. And we got ashore after waiting. You know, the waiting was not bad. So, but that shore was not going to Jones Beach, you know.
Sam, do you recall what you saw and what you heard when you hit Omaha Beach?
When I hit Omaha Beach, we got ashore, and our trucks were coming over. There was a short bluff about 500 feet from the shoreline, but before we got to that bluff, there was a gully, a ditch, and so we already almost were dried off or got out of the water, and there we went back into water in this gully, and that was the most devastating. And that was not shown to us in the aerial view by our own information. So that was another thing. And then if you would turn around, the devastation, you probably didn't want to turn around. First of all, our mine trucks got hit, direct hits, and they went. So we lost our trucks. The vehicles that were parked along the shoreline were all the ones that were taken out of commission, so they were on fire. They were loading either wounded or dead on there. It was just not the kind of sight that humans can tolerate. And as we were detached, I couldn't even, we only had 4 of us who had to be anywhere. We had to meet up with the rest of the squad. We never found them that night, but we were all scattered. And when we got to that bluff, as I say, there were beachmasters on the shoreline telling us to go inland, further up. And as you looked up, you saw the Rangers had just cleared that long path up to the hill, which was the godsend of everything. But trying to get around, I think that was shown in that movie that I hadn't seen yet, or I didn't see. There were soldiers laying on the incline with their feet blown off. They were all in a minefield. And the tape, what we used to call tracing tape, all around them to protect anyone else from going into that minefield. And those were the bravest soldiers, because they kept directing us away from the minefield. The bravest soldiers that I can imagine I've ever seen in my life. There with their feet blown off, telling us not to come into the minefield.
Sam, you're a distinguished veteran of World War II. You made many, many sacrifices. The generation that you came from made many, many sacrifices. How do you feel about those sacrifices now?
I best can describe it when my son asked me about the war, and thinking that I was a hero and all, I says, you know, I don't believe that heroes were made just in that war. And for the reason that this war did not end all wars. And it just leaves an emptiness that we did what we had to do, and we did it possibly because we wanted to do it, for the good of the family, good of yourself, good of the country. And yet we did not establish anything in this world that says that was the last great war, and the rest of the time that humans live on this earth won't have to face that. So the accomplishment, yes, was incredible. We went there, we conquered, we won, and yet we came out without real victory because wars are still going on.